you have rehab facilities for stroke? He said, yes. I said, the usual length of rehab is between 3 to 5 weeks. He said, yes. I said, you send away your patients at the point where there is no real detectable improvement.
Mm-hmm.
It sort of plateaus.
Yeah.
He said, yes. I said, now, the understanding of the reason for reaching the plateau is the fact that the person had a stroke, correct? He said, yes. I said, that's where you're wrong. And that's where my work comes in. The reason they need rehabilitation is because they had a stroke. The reason that they reach a plateau is the intervention. They reach the outcome because of the intervention, and they reach the plateau because of the intervention.
This is the Recovery After Stroke podcast with Bill Gasiamis, helping you navigate recovery after stroke.
Hello and welcome to episode 232 of the Recovery After Stroke podcast. To learn more about my guests, including links to their social media and other pages, and to download a full transcript of the entire interview, please go to recoveryafterstroke.com/episodes. If you would like to support this podcast, the best way to do it is to leave a 5-star review and a few words about what the show means to you on iTunes and Spotify. If you're watching on YouTube, comment below the video, like this episode, and to get notifications of future episodes, subscribe to the show on the platform of your choice. And if you subscribe in YouTube, hit the notifications bell so that you can get notifications of new episodes as they arrive. My guest today is Anat Baniel, the founder of the Anat Baniel Method, a powerful practice that takes advantage of the brain's remarkable ability to change itself for the better, to heal body and mind. Anat is also the author of the book Kids Beyond Limits, and although marketed to parents of children with neurological conditions, be it from birth or as a result of traumatic brain injury, the book is rich in information that may help you while on the road to recovery after stroke. Trained by Dr. Moshe Feldenkrais and with high praise from people like John Gray, Norman Doidge, Ariana Huffington, and Jack Canfield, this book would be a great addition to your bookshelf. Anat Baniel, welcome to the podcast.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I'm probably 3/4 of the way through listening to your book, Kids Beyond Limits. And it's interesting because the title, Kids Beyond Limits, is, I know it's been written for parents about their kids, but really it's also applicable to me and anyone else who's had a stroke or any other neurological condition that needs some new insights, new ideas, new ways of approaching recovery and healing the brain. And also the other part of that, which is like a new approach or a different way of looking at healing the brain and recovering movement that was lost, etc. And I've got so many questions, but before we talk about the content in the book, which is so appropriate for my listeners and people watching on YouTube, I'd like to ask you about how you got to be in a position where you're doing the kind of work that's helping people overcome neurological conditions.
Okay, so regarding the book Kids Beyond Limits, it's I totally agree with you. It's about how to facilitate for the brain to do its job when there's interruption, genetic or stroke. Lots of quite a few babies are born with stroke or get stroke early on. And then there's the book for adults, Moving to Life, that we're actually going to publish soon a new edition. So if people want to read about it in the more adult version, that's possible. Kids Beyond Limits, in a way, is better for people who had stroke because it really deals with assault to the brain. Moving to Life is more in general how to enhance your life, not necessarily in the face of a traumatic brain injury. So, yeah. So how I came to do this work, my training was in psychology, clinical psychology. I also studied, have a degree in statistics, because of interest also in science side of things, but also always had interest in the brain. And as I was in my graduate studies, schooling to become a clinical psychologist, I realized that it was all very cognitive. It was very interesting. It was valuable. It has served me my whole career. And at the same time, what was missing for me was the immediacy of the body, the immediacy of the kinesthetic experience and of movement that is so there for us all the time. And I searched where I could study, and I also maybe about the brain, but the brain was really, there wasn't much known in terms of actually impacting function, directly thinking about the brain. So I then remembered my studies with Dr. Feldenkrais's movement work, Moshe Feldenkrais, as a child, and with my dance teacher. So I found him and connected with him and trained with him to learn his method. And his method has two main pillars. One is movement, the other one is the brain. So it's science. He was a scientist. He was a physicist and a mathematician, and so I got all what I was interested in covered in one person's method, and I worked with him. And first, I worked primarily with dancers and musicians and academicians, because that was my world. And then Feldenkrais actually was the one who got me to work with the first child. I didn't expect to work with children, with babies. And that in about a year or two, parents started hearing about the work and the outcomes, and more parents started showing up. So the children started taking more and more of my time, and the dancers and high performers became less and less. And then also I started working with stroke patients, adult stroke patients. And in the process of doing that, I looked into understanding what I do gives the outcomes that the clients were getting. And they were getting really, and are getting really breakthrough, not breakout, but breakthrough outcomes. And, we can talk more about that. But This was my path.
We will talk about that for sure, because I think it misses things. Sorry. A lot of recovery after a stroke misses some things that I think, now that I've read most of your book, is obvious now that I've read it, but is very easily missed during recovery. My experience in recovery is you have brain surgery, you wake up, you can't walk, you go into recovery, and the people trying to rehabilitate you, the personal therapists and the occupational therapists, they do a fantastic job. They get you on your feet and they try and reinstate what was there before, using the same method that was being used before I was unwell and couldn't use my left side of my body. So they kind of approach it with the exact same tools that they would have if I, for example, injured my knee or my toes or my ankle, when the challenge is actually not my toes or my knee or my ankle. It's my brain, and they understand neuroplasticity to an extent, but they understand in a very simplistic and basic way, which is enough for a lot of people to get over the line and get decent results. But I think they miss some critical components. We're going to talk about those in a moment.
There is a resistance to change. And the resistance to change is not just this way. There is if the word resistance is the correct word, but resistance to change also on a biological basis.
Yeah.
If you look at us, we develop habits. And the habits, we need habits. We couldn't function without habits. And the habits get grooved in, they get automated, and our sense of safety and a sense of predictability, uncertainty is very disruptive to our sense of well-being. So, and the habits form very quickly and very powerfully. And we can change the habits. That's a big part of what my work does. And that's a big part that Feldenkrais's work was doing.
Yeah.
Because how do you get the brain to not just learn something new, but to transition from what it has relied on until today, to transition and rely on your left foot or on your right foot? You have a stroke, and all of a sudden you can't rely on it.
Yeah.
And very, very quickly, the brain changes itself, reorganizes itself, so that you look to be able to transport yourself, to transition yourself from point A to point B in a safe way.
Yes.
And it doesn't want you to use or doesn't let you rely on that which is not reliable, and for a good reason. But that becomes a very powerful habit very quickly.
Yeah, learned
and because
helplessness.
of that, it's so important what's done immediately after stroke.
Yeah.
And the way that rehab is done is so important, because it can instill limitations very powerfully due to the way that the rehab is done. And that's the place where there's, in my experience, complete blindness. And we can talk about that, because it's
absolutely.
simple. It's actually very simple, but it's different. I was interviewed on another podcast last week, and at the end of the podcast, the interviewer said to me something that I never heard before in this way, and it was wonderful. He said to me, "What you offer is very counterintuitive and makes total sense." He said, and I never had those two things happen at the same time for the same thing.
I would completely agree. Absolutely 100% agree with that statement. And the reason being is because you talk about things that most people miss. And one of the things that you talk about is movement with attention. So we're going through therapy, and although perhaps I'm in rehabilitation and somebody's paying attention to my movement, I am not being made aware to pay attention to the way that I'm moving and the way that I need to adjust my movement, right?
No, you're missing something. I'm so sorry. And everybody misses it. And when I teach a training or a workshop, it takes 3 days of being engaged in the process before people start really getting it.
Yeah.
It's not the attention to the instructions. It's not even so much the attention to what you do. I say lift your arm, whatever. It's the attention to what you feel as you do the movement.
Right. Okay.
And that is a huge jump. And that is the jump that got Dr. Michael Merzenich to become a huge supporter of my work. The rest of it too, all the 9 essentials. And it's his research that we discovered, because when I knew it, I made it my essential. But when I wrote my book, my colleague, Dr. Neil Sharp, I said to him, can you go out and research to see if anyone in the research universe, in the in neuroscience research, has realized that movement without attention to the feeling of self as you do it does not provide change or very limited change. And if there's an attention to the feeling of what is done as it is done, changes happen, improvements happen, the range of motion increases, spasticity reduces by the fact that it gives the brain information to improve of what it's doing, the intention that it's executing as it's executing it. And this feels so weird, you know, it's like I don't have to go 1, 2, 3, 1, or force it or stretch it or put electrical thing. You just have to activate the capacity of the brain to feel, to notice the sensation, the feeling, because without it, we can't direct ourselves anyway. And that's my main essential. That's my first essential, because movement, first of all, is my tool. And I say that movement is the language of the brain. But then the question is, how good are you in speaking? You know, use it to communicate with the brain intentionally in the conditions. And I should have brought it. That's a quote. Where did I see it? Oh yeah, I know where I saw it. I can look for it in a minute briefly. It's if you provide the brain the conditions that the brain needs, the conditions that under which the brain functions well, then you get a brain that can learn and change in ways that otherwise it can't. And when somebody had a stroke, we need to try and really optimize those conditions with which we give, how we provide the interaction to the other person. You know, anyway, I can say so much, but
I hear you. So practically, with regards to movement with attention, if I'm putting my foot on the ground for the first time after my brain surgery, is it when I'm putting my foot on the ground that I'm paying attention, what it's giving me back, what kind of feedback I'm getting from the ground or from the underneath of my foot? What specifically do I need to pay attention to?
Okay, so yes, but it's a little more refined conversation, and there are important elements here. Okay. So let me just say a few general things that will then what I say can fit into it, okay? Yeah. because it's a shift in an understanding, okay? The brain is an information system. It's a self-organizing system. It's a holistic system. If when I move now, my brain has to account to every part of my body. If I'm sitting like this and I'm completely into something and I'm totally safe and I'm not going to be moved, I can maybe move this and not really care what happens to the rest of my body because it doesn't impact my relationship to gravity. But if I'm standing up, I better know if I move my arms forward or otherwise I'll fall on my face, right? So the brain is, and it's very complex, it's very dynamic. And it's just there going like, you know, and like it is the thing that gets us be who we are and organizes everything we do, right? Why am I saying that? In a minute, we'll talk more about the essentials, but when somebody wakes up from surgery or just from the stroke, not everybody gets surgery after stroke, and all of a sudden your right leg doesn't do what you want it to do, right? The tendency, or the arm, the tendency is to try and interact with the parts that are not working. like the arm or the leg.
Mm-hmm.
The most affected parts, which means are the parts that the brain lost most of the connections, right?
Yes.
That's the parts that everybody zeroes in on.
Yes, yes, correct.
That's the last part I will touch. Think of it in terms of the whole body, and think of a baby, a newborn. Every part of their body has twitches and stuff, but they have no voluntary movement. The first place that comes into voluntary control is basically the mouth, tongue, the sucking actions, eyes kicking next, by the way. But the child does not get really a ability to do much with the arms or the legs, like stand or walk, before there's a very significant control of the center of the body in very complex relationships. So I have now a granddaughter. She's 7 months old. I just got a video, and I could even show it here. I can just put it up and show it. And you see she's now holding objects and she's moving them and looking at them. But the biggest thing she's doing is rolling to her belly, rolling to her back, rolling to her belly, rolling to her back. And magnificent way that she does it. The arms and the legs are still kind of like the outcome of that.
Mm-hmm.
As she gets more and she gets to sit and stand, and I got my daughter to absolutely not do tummy time with her. This is one of again, another huge mistake in people trying to control an outcome before and skipping the process that leads to the outcome.
Mm-hmm. So
I'm talking about the process that leads to the outcome. I get somebody who had stroke. One of the things that I will do first is go to their pelvis, their back, their spine, and because it's much easier to recover. Because let's say if somebody had a right side stroke, the left side, the whole left side is impacted. But because there's much less differentiation, there's less density of mapping of the center of the body in very dramatic way. If you go and look at the homunculus, the sensory homunculus or the motor homunculus, the arms and the hands are huge and the thumb is enormous and the tongue is enormous. And then you have a tiny little thing that's the pelvis and a tiny little thing that's the back. So the loss proportion is much smaller. To recover function there
in the
is
pelvis
a lot easier.
Okay, so to give you an analogy, you're working with our strengths, not our weaknesses.
If you've had a stroke and you're in recovery, you'll know what a scary and confusing time it can be. You're likely to have a lot of questions going through your mind. Like, how long will it take to recover? Will I actually recover? What things should I avoid in case I make matters worse? Doctors will explain things, but obviously you've never had a stroke before. You probably don't know what questions to ask. If this is you, you may be missing out on doing things that could help speed up your recovery. If you're finding yourself in that situation, stop worrying and head to recoveryafterstroke.com, where you can download a guide that will help you. It's called 7 Questions to Ask Your Doctor About Your Stroke. These 7 questions are the ones Bill wished he'd asked when he was recovering from a stroke. They'll not only help you better understand your condition, they'll help you take a more active role in your recovery. Head to the website now, recoveryafterstroke.com, and download the guide. It's free.
Very much so, but to understand the thinking, I say, do not try to make somebody stand up when they lost the ability to stand up. Just like you will not take a 3-month-old baby and try to make them stand up. And by the way, don't do it with a 9-month-old either, because if they don't do it spontaneously, it means they're not ready. They don't have the underlying neural networks to perform it well enough. So I'm working on helping that brain recover and it can't go back. If these are lost connections. there are two things here. There are lost connections and there are lost networks, neural networks.
Right.
Because the neural network is a lot bigger than a bunch of connections. You see, the motor cortex is associated to sensory, which is associated to the visual, which is associated to the lower centers of the brain. So, but if you kill enough in the network, the whole network is off. So if you bring back elements of the network, we just have been working with a 17-year-old. She had a tumor in her brainstem, which is like not a good place to get a tumor. But anyway, when she was 2 years old, they did surgery and removed it. She's been getting therapy for 15 years. She's 17. She is, by the way, the most potent learner, one of the most potent learners I've ever worked with. But she presented herself terrible, kind of standing, but has two people to support her from the back, and she's more spastic on her right side, and her speech is kind of like that. And it happened very young, so of course, in terms of schooling and everything, got severely interrupted. So people also way underestimate her intelligence. Just 2 weeks ago, she has had a total of 6 weeks of sessions with us. 2 weeks, and then they went back. They live on the other, on the East Coast. They came back for 4 weeks now. So four-ish weeks into her thing, and she couldn't side sit to one side and can't control. And and of course we've already been, me and my team, most of the work was done by my team. I had her on the floor, not on the table. And I had her start doing a rolling movement through the side in a way that a young child tends to do at around age 1.5 years to 2 years. I mean, that's usually when they get that really well. And very slowly with the essentials. And at a certain point, she could just do it, and perfectly and quickly and very accurately in terms of the timing of what bends when, and the relationship of the head to the pelvis and the whole thing. And it was like, whoa, it's like her brain recognized it. She did it until she was 2 or something like that.
Yeah.
But she had no access to it. But when enough around it was built, was recreated, reinvented by the brain, the whole thing came in. And we see that. Now, depends how much destruction there was.
Yes.
But I'm saying so much stuff, I don't know if people can follow that. But the point is, you start where the person is. If the person who had stroke or brain surgery after stroke is not able to stand themselves up, you might have to stand them up for medical reasons. There was another 26-year-old woman, daughter of a friend of mine, a female athlete that had she did like a performance on bicycles, mountain, and just smacked her head terribly, and so on and so forth. And because of the drainage that they wanted, the swelling, they needed her upright. Then support her fully and hold her upright fully, but don't ask her to stand. Don't expect her to participate, right? And you start working lying down, because we learn to stand up lying down. We did
very
not
interesting.
Stand up, standing up.
You explained my whole experience with the right side brain damage and then the left side deficits. It's exactly what happened. And one of the first things that happened to me, which was extremely uncomfortable and really frightening, even though I went through the motions because I was told that that's how I needed to be rehabilitated, was I was attached to the harness, which was attached to the ceiling, and I was like a puppet. And that's really uncomfortable in the crotch. And then I had one person on each side of my body moving my left leg for me into the position and into the right, and then the right leg and so on. And it was really, I have a photo of it. It was such a weird experience to be harnessed to the ceiling and going through that process.
And did you find it helpful? Were you able to start standing better afterwards?
No, that took another 2 or 3 weeks for the standing to happen. That was probably 2 or 3 days after surgery. But the whole time, I needed to be the person who supported myself, because then they put me in between the 2 parallel bars, the 2 horizontal bars, and I had to hold myself up with the left side again of my body, of my arm, which wasn't working properly. The whole thing was completely dysfunctional and not really comfortable, and it was really scary, and I was afraid I was going to fall, and my fear was getting in the way of my excitement to be there and to participate in my own recovery.
I want to say that between doing what you do, the way you went through, and doing nothing, I think doing what you went through is absolutely the thing to do.
Correct. Yeah.
So it's not like, oh, you shouldn't have done the rehab that you did. And it's very, very important to say that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were just left lying down, I don't want to even think what it would have been like.
Yeah. Yeah.
However, we're talking about the future. We're talking about possibility. The same people that gave their dedication, they learn to do this, that give their time, and there's the funding for it, and the institution, and the whole thing can be upgraded in a quantum way.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm after. So it's not about bashing what the people or what is being done, even though it might sound like I'm doing that. It's not that. It's my passion is about, it's kind of like, if you need to get from the East Coast to the West Coast, you want to visit your family or to go something important, but you only have a horse and a cart, and there are no roads paved.
Yeah.
So we don't want to do the horse and buggy version of crossing from the East Coast to the West Coast. We want to take the version of the really good airplane to get us there.
The upgraded version. That's exactly it. In order to feel safe,
it's more than upgraded. It's transformational.
Yeah.
By the way, safety is the most important. And you were obviously able to benefit. I work a lot of people that really didn't, and because we've been working on a research proposal on stroke, we have studied the field, and there might have been, we haven't looked at it for 2 years, COVID kind of stopped everything. So maybe there's more stuff that we're not aware of. But the statistics of success and failure in recovery from stroke, and of course, what is considered success, I wouldn't call it success, but the rate of success is really, really, really low.
Yeah.
I mean, people don't get back to being independent and functional in a sufficient way. You're doing very well.
I agree. In order for me to feel safe, I asked to do my rehabilitation in a swimming pool, because I didn't need to be attached to the ceiling, and I didn't need to be afraid of falling over.
Yes.
And it was a real godsend. It was the...
So you asked for what?
Rehabilitation in the swimming pool.
No, but so you just did it without being hung out from the ceiling?
Yeah, I was in the swimming pool. The water was supporting my weight.
Oh, that is the best thing you could have done.
Yeah, right. That was...
that is, we say that in my work, if I could do it all in water, everybody will get better faster.
Yeah, right. Okay.
You take it with a gravitational demand. You see, lying down is the closest approximation to removing the demand that the gravitational field puts on the body in terms of balance and everything.
Yes.
Yeah, so this was brilliant. I mean, this is actually, we used to have a practitioner that I trained that did work in the pool with mostly with children. So we used to send our clients to also work with her, because it is like the optimal conditions initially in the rehab process. I mean, it's fantastic.
It worked. It was disarming. I was able to become a very different participant, a very different patient in that swimming pool compared to the one that was outside the swimming pool.
Yeah.
When I didn't have the words to describe what you just described about enhancing the methodologies used right now to rehabilitate people, but that's what I felt when I'm reading the book, when I'm listening to the book. I see your 9 essential steps towards supporting somebody in the recovery. And we've only spoken about movement with essential 1, but essential 2, going slow. Even though I was asked to go slow, there was no emphasis put on the benefit of being slow, because I wanted to get better quick. I wanted to recover fast. I wanted to get out of rehab quickly. So when they were slowing me down, which was an amazing thing, now I understand it's an amazing thing, I was getting frustrated and annoyed because they wouldn't let me walk on my own sooner. And it was like, it's not, you say it's not safe for you and you're not there yet. And they just didn't emphasize certain things that they were doing. And I'm not sure whether they deeply know the benefit of being slow in
they're being intentional, and a
Yeah.
lot of places are not asking to go slow, they're asking to go fast. But
yes, you know what, they want you out of there quickly because it's a public system, you're filling a position, and they want to make sure that they can get the next person in and there's not a big wait, etc. So tell me a little bit about the benefits of slowness and being intentional about that.
Let me say something that maybe will make it very clear right away. Fast, we can only do what we already know. That means the connections are there, the myelination is there, the signals go quickly, the electrical signals move quickly. In the beginning, when something is new, it's not grooved in yet. What we say grooved in, which means the neurophysiological process of creating the connections and the communication between the cells that can go fast. So when somebody has a stroke, a bunch of those communication channels are gone, right? And you need to create new ones. But when you create new ones, if you put the burden on fast on the new thing, it gets inhibited and it reverts to what's there. And what's there is the way you show up after you had stroke. That is the existing things that you have. Whatever is left over, and one of the things that kicks in right away is spasticity. And spasticity is the result of loss of differentiation, of loss of connections. So so a baby, when it's born, it can only do this or this with the hand. It's either all flexion or letting go, flexion, letting go. It doesn't have this. This is billions of connections, billions upon billions of connections to be able to do that, just that, okay? So you get smacked on the head, blood, whatever, and you lose those connections. When you give the intention, it activates what it knows, but the whole area that has been affected can only do one thing. It is not differentiated anymore. We need to work on differentiation. I just said she's became a very close friend, Jill Bolte Taylor. I'm sure you know the name of Jill Bolte Taylor. And she goes and she did my training and she wants my work to get out. And anybody who emails her, she says, go to Anat, do Anat Baniel Method. go and she, and you know, we're all experiencing the difficulty to bring the novel way of thinking, the novel way of practicing rehabilitation into the world. And she says to me, Anat, it's all differentiation. Like, bottom line, it's all differentiation. I said, hello, good morning. You know, that's what I've been telling her now for, I don't know, 8-10 years. So but it's like, it's really, so what happens when you go fast, you get the outcome. When you attempt to go fast, you get the default of what's available. What's available is the spasticity.
Right.
And then guess what? The brain learns its experiences. That becomes the pattern. That's why I said to the head doctor a bunch of years back of all the Kaiser, all of Kaiser, medical system. And I was invited to speak to him privately in a dinner by another doctor to explain to him my thinking about brain change and its relevance in, medical intervention. And I saw that he wasn't quite grogging what I was saying, So I asked him towards the end, I said to him, you have rehab facilities for stroke? He said, yes. I said, the usual, I said, let's just talk about ischemic stroke. I said, the usual length of rehab is between 3 to 5 weeks. He said, yes. I said, you send away your patients at the point where there is no real detectable improvement. Mm-hmm. It sort of plateaus. Yeah. He said, yes. I said, now, the understanding of the reason for reaching the plateau, the reason for that is the fact that the person had a stroke, correct? He said, yes. I said, that's where you're wrong. And that's where my work comes in. The reason they need rehabilitation is because they had a stroke. The reason that they reach a plateau is the intervention.
Ooh, wow.
And that is, now, they reach the outcome because of the intervention, and they reach the plateau also because of the intervention.
Wow.
And I said, you shift some of how they do what they do, you will have completely different trajectory of outcomes.
Less plateau.
And that is what my work is all about. And that is what my vision is all about.
Yes.
So slow is important because it allows the person to feel. It gives the time and the space to feel what is going on that goes into movement with attention to what you feel. Mm. So if you ask somebody to move fast or you move fast with them, you kill off the ability to do that. For the brain, those are the conditions. That's what Michael Merzenich realized. He says in the foreword to my book, that how surprised he was to find me coming from a completely different direction, defining the same understanding of what gets positive brain change to happen as 30 years of neuroscience research, except combining those and bringing it to rehab is a whole other story, which you talked about. So, and then I want to mention a couple other essentials because it's so quick once you understand that you want the brain to perceive differences, because it's when we perceive differences, that's the information. The brain is an information system. It's not a mechanical system. Stimulation alone is not information. Stimulation is required for there to be information. The brain transforms stimulation into information it can work with by perceiving differences. So if you move me really fast and hard and it hurts and I'm afraid I'm going to fall, I have no idea. The brain is very global, undifferentiated chunks of information, which it says, I'm in danger. So you hold your breath, you stiffen your chest, your arm gets more spastic, something maybe happens, and you got yourself into water. I mean, you are like an intuitive genius, because this is brilliant. Now, next essential, reduce the force. Because when it's a physiological law that says, it's Weber-Fechner law, that in order to perceive a difference or perceive an increase or decrease in the intensity of a stimulation, the more the base stimulation is intense, the greater in a logarithmic equation. That means it's like this. It just jumps up. So when it's the stimulation is very faint, not so faint you don't perceive it, but very faint, you need very little added stimulation to notice the difference. So if you're in a dark room and somebody puts just a little bit of light, you notice it. You turn a flashlight on, you jump, right? But if you are in full sunlight and somebody behind you puts a flashlight, you wouldn't know it happened. It happened, but you wouldn't know. If you're talking to somebody, if it's very light sound around you, like party, you were in a party, people drink. Usually when they drink, they get loud. You sit in a restaurant, you can't hear what people say because it requires for somebody to scream and God knows what level, right? And at a certain point, it just doesn't work. You just don't perceive it. And that is really, really a huge deal, because when people have a stroke, they get spastic. The spasticity itself is already very, very intense.
Okay.
So I put you lying down. I support your head. And I do not activate. I look to avoid activating the spasticity, because the spasticity will reduce your sensitivity. And then the whole exercise, from my point of view, is ridiculous.
Okay.
So, and a waste of an opportunity. So I leave your spastic arm, I leave your spastic leg, but I go and I just move your chest in certain ways that doesn't require much differentiation. And, you know, I just have taken note. There is a documentary about my work called The Life Unbound. So first half is about a small child. Second half is about a 27-year-old young woman that had a stroke. And she, you know, phasic and stuff, beautiful gal, was a cheerleader for the NFL, so she's an athlete. Terrible stroke, and they didn't discover her for 36 hours. You know, so massive damage. And she came when she was done already with the rehab. And in the very first session I did with her, she went with her father was with her, they went to their hotel room, and it was the first time that she felt her chest and her face since the stroke. I didn't even know that. I don't know what the outcomes are going to be, but I start talking to the brain and go, look, you can do this, you can do that. So reducing the effort. Now they're hanging you from above, but that is not the way the brain doesn't know you're not a bird. So your whole life, everything is from the bottom up. The baby is lying flat on the ground, then it rolls, then it starts distancing itself from the ground until it comes to standing. And of course, it's on all fours, so it has 4 points of pressure, and then it comes all the way up. And it's the information from the feet that the brain uses to balance you, not information being hung up. So this alone, I mean, it's as a variation of movement is okay, but not as the basis. So reducing the effort and the force in the movement itself is so important. I would not try to get somebody who had a stroke or any other kind of TBI to regain function in an upright position or a semi-upright position. I will get the brain to start restructuring itself, rebuilding itself, reorganizing itself from its lying position. And the most comfortable lying position, which is on the side with, bent, more like a embryonic position.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I say water is so great, because it supports you from all directions, or almost all directions. You don't want to drown. But and then comes variation. And variation is magical, because people know what you lost. So they ask you to do the thing you lost. You can't do the thing you lost, because if you could do it, you'd do it.
Yeah.
It's like this insane thing. But they say, so how would you learn? Because if I don't tell you what to do, did you tell a baby how to do all the movements it does? No, you don't. It's the organic progression. So variations is such a rich source of information to the brain, intellectually, physically, emotionally. So if we can't do something, one of the things that I do with people is have them fail on purpose in many different ways.
Say that again. Fail on purpose in many
different
ways.
Fail on purpose in many different ways. Mm-hmm. I worked in the beginning, before I started doing so much work with children, I worked with some of the world's best known classical musicians, mm-hmm. conductors, violinists, players, pianists, whole orchestras. I worked with the San Francisco Orchestra. I worked with a Tanglewood Music Festival, and they have their orchestra, and so on. Seiji Osawa, you name it. I worked with these people. And, they go, and they were trained, not many of them are brilliant musicians, but they were trained not following the essentials. They were supposed to hold the violin a certain way. They said, so they developed, repetitive injuries and so on. And I worked with, I remember a cellist, a young British, brilliant cellist that could hardly play anymore. It was in Tanglewood, and I had only 20 minutes with him. It was a demo. So I sat him down, and I did it also with a very well-known cellist in a quartet, a very well-known European quartet. I did a similar thing with them. I had them take a very, very simple kind of music, like a Twinkle, Twinkle, Little, which is a Anna Magdalena thing, Bach, that he wrote for her. And I just take a phrase, and they're brilliant musicians. So for them, that alone is a huge variations, because, hey, I can play Schubert, I can play this, I can play that. I go like, I know you can, but we're going to do this. You see, reduce the effort, reduce the intensity. And I had him hold the cello, but with a bow, imaginary bow. So he couldn't really do the movements, right? Mm-hmm. And you activate the imagination, which is, of course, one of my essentials. Mm-hmm. And then I said to him, just feel like you really loved it. And just, the German guy, I said to him, play it. And it was nothing. He could play it. And he had pain here. And then I said to him, play it badly. He first he couldn't grasp what I told him, because since he was a little child, he was always told to play it a certain way and to play it correctly. Mm-hmm. I said, play it badly. And he just couldn't do it. Mm-hmm. He was so rigid. And I said, do you teach little children to play the cello? He said, yes. I said, do they play badly sometimes? He said, sure. I said, do you remember any of the badly played things? He said, sure. I said, imitate it. So he did. He played it badly. And then I asked him to play badly the second time, the third time, fourth time. While he was playing badly, I did all kinds of movements, a lot of different differentiations, variations with the shoulders. So he really played badly, because he was holding the bow. The young guy, I didn't have him hold the bow. I did something different. But anyway, so it was like, it went like crazy. And when I asked him to do it the fifth badly way, he couldn't think of anything. I said, that's okay. 4 was good enough. I said, now just play. 2 things happened. The pain was gone, and it stopped him from playing. I mean, he was afraid he was losing his career. And the sound, the tone was so spectacular. I heard it, he heard it, he was like stunned. Variation, the brain needs of elements with which to work to put together the thing you're trying to accomplish.
I understand exactly what you're saying. Me re-expressing it back to the audience in my own way is very difficult, but I know what you're saying. I came across many years ago an artist who had lost the ability to paint because you're describing with the cellist exactly the same problem that the artist had. For an entire lifetime, the artist was using their hand to paint and put ink on a piece of paper or a canvas a certain way every single time. And what they discovered after many years was that there was some kind of a tremble in the hand, which was not the type of tremble that you would associate to Parkinson's or anything like that, because it wasn't in any other part of the body.
That's what happened to Leon Fleischer. I worked with him. I mean, that's what happens to a lot of musicians, that all of a sudden they have the involuntary spasticity. And
yes.
I mean, I worked with hundreds of musicians, hundreds of them. And it's the biggest mistake in teaching music. You imagine you take a child, you tell him to hold the violin. You say, hold it this way, now hold it this way, now put it a little here, make it a little uncomfortable. Now try to play this way. Now try to play this way. Now lie on your back. I mean, I was asked to do it professionally, but I didn't have passion about it. I worked with golfers. I did a few things with golfers. And I just had them I did also a whole movement lesson on the floor. I really needed to get their brain to just wake up and start operating on a higher level. But then, because the brain itself, when you give it the essentials, becomes, and that's what Marzinik wrote, about, in the back of my first book. He wrote that my work helps the brain become a stronger, better brain that does its own job better. And its own job is to learn, is to put things in a way that they weren't there before. And
is it to find many different ways to get the same outcome? For example, the painting of using the brush.
Many different ways to execute the same intention.
To get the same result.
Not to get the same result. We don't control the result. I mean, we make sure not to hurt ourselves. To try to execute the same intention in different ways. So to give you a bigger extreme, my book, Moving to Life, was just published. My father was a brilliant researcher, right? And there was something that, they built a whole plant to produce the thing that he invented. And they had a big problem, doesn't matter the story, but something was happening that they didn't expect. So that my father was sitting on a computer trying to resolve the problem, right? Chemist, and he's working, and he calls me and says, I sat for 2 hours and I could not figure a way to solve this problem. But he said, but I just read your book, and I read the essential, and I thought about the variation essential. So intentionally, he said, oh, let's try this. And he knew it wasn't going to work. Sometimes when you're a big expert in something, he said, but I took myself through the process of failing. He said, in 10 minutes, I had the solution.
Right. Okay.
That's how extreme it is. Yeah. You can know it's not going to work, but by the fact that you give yourself the experience of the process, because in the process of failure, there are always useful elements for success.
Yes. Okay.
So you generate a lot of mobility and freedom and options for the brain to integrate from those different to create something new.
It's like Edison the story about Edison failing 9,999
Yeah,
times and then learning the one
yeah,
that he needed
and the
to get
good
the light
thing
bulb.
is that most of the time you don't have to fail 10,000 times.
Yes, yes.
You really don't.
Yeah.
I mean, this little 17-year-old
Yeah.
or the mother of my friend, it's a heartbreak, but you know, and they were trying to stand her up, but not just to get the drainage, but they were doing it as part of physical therapy. And it's devastating, because if she knows what's happening to her, she's going to be traumatized, realizing how much she has lost or believes she has lost. And if she's not getting what's happening, what are you doing, right?
Yeah.
And so I gave her the courage to stop it. And she's not a practitioner, but I showed her on Zoom very gentle few things. She couldn't touch anything around the neck, and you know, too much injuries and stuff, but to do some very simple things around the chest and the pelvis, and the feet, because the feet, it reflects in the brain so much of what it does when we walk and stand and so on. And you can imagine an athlete, she has more than most people. And I told her to do it so she could feel whether her daughter feels it. There's a way to know if when you touch somebody, they're feeling it, what I call movement with attention, right? Mm-hmm. And I said, then don't do more than 7 minutes at a time. Because if it's not helping, don't exhaust her system. Mm-hmm. And if it's helping, don't exhaust her system. Mm-hmm. So you see, that's another thing. Don't exhaust people and let them sleep. That's Jill Bolte Taylor. Her mother, a big part of what worked is because she let her sleep and then did little units. And you realize when she was tired, little units. That was like ingenious on the part of her mom. Anyway, so she did that. And the next day, the girl was able to stand and hold up her head. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not 10,000. Now, does she need a lot more for full recovery? Yes. Of course. Yeah. But you see real change. The girl that I told you that now they're going home for a month and they're going to move for a year to be next to us because we want her to catch up on, because she's brilliant. I said, this girl is so intelligent, and she grew into being very limited because people didn't see that she was intelligent because she couldn't respond to the way they were trying to help. Yeah. You know, you can hear I'm just crazy passionate about this.
I can. That's why I'm letting you talk, because, and for people listening, this is going to be a podcast that you have to listen to again, and you have to actually get the book, because the book is extremely well written, extremely succinct and to the point, and I got so much out of it, and that's why I am a bit in awe, and I'm a little bit overwhelmed at the same time because I'm learning so much. But we've only spoken about 3 of your 9 essentials. We've spoken about movement with attention, about being slow, about variation, and we don't need to talk about all of them.
And reduction of force.
And reduction of force. But we don't need to talk about all of them. However, I want to definitely talk about enthusiasm, because this is something that can be lost on survivors of stroke or traumatic brain injuries when they're going into rehabilitation situation, because there's, like, I was in a little bit of fear. I wasn't enthusiastic about being hung up and being rehabilitated in the form of a puppet, although I understand why people were doing it. I don't have an issue with the way I was rehabilitated, but reading this, I see the missed opportunities that could have potentially been there. So tell me about the importance of enthusiasm, and not just of the person going through the rehabilitation, not just the patient.
Okay, let me tell you what I mean by enthusiasm, which really goes with the whole idea that the brain needs to perceive differences. And the emotional relationship, or the relationship between learning and emotions. Okay, that's really, is that the essential, that kind of like, really, that's what's behind it. So we reduce the force, we slow down, we focus on what we feel as we move, And then we notice that, I'm just giving you an example, it's just an example, that yesterday I could only move my arm this much, rotate it, let's say. And now I've done this, and all of a sudden it rotates this much. Further, and maybe lighter. Always when it goes like that, better, it's lighter, easier, more pleasurable. That always happens. That's the way that the brain goes, like, check, like it. It works well. But I need to do this, I don't know, for tennis, for something. So I go like this, but because it's not the whole thing, I'm going to either not notice it, not give it importance. The brain gets gazillions of units of experiences every day, right? But some things get memorized, are grooved in very quickly, and other things just like dissipate, right? They don't really stay. One of the ways, there are two ways that are very clearly the way the brain goes like, this is important, and the neurophysiological processes of grooving it in very quickly. One is when it's really dangerous or painful or scary, that it compromises our sense of safety. Okay? The other one, when it's really great, really pleasurable, distinctly better than anything else until that moment. Positive emotions. So both of them have a lot of power. The negative has actually more power because it's like survival. When something good happens and you go and you amplify it, you let yourself feel enthusiasm. And the best place to start practicing enthusiasm is maybe a little bit outside of yourself. So you go to the grocery store and the checkout person has a nice buckle on their belt. And you go like, oh my goodness, I really think this is gorgeous. And maybe you even tell them. Or you just let yourself be an amplifier of the positive and the seeker of the positive, not Pollyanna, not denial kind of nonsense, but a seek. And my students that improve the fastest are the ones that get most kind of that flood of well-being. Now the story comes. I worked with this little girl. She was diagnosed global brain damage, that really, really bad. She had real stuff with her brain, okay? She changed every lesson. And of course, the practitioner, the more the practitioner can feel subtle changes, the more powerful and useful they are to their client. Because if I work with you and you change just a little and I don't notice it, and I keep going as if it didn't happen, missed opportunity. If I notice it and I go with you, you notice it, you go with me, I noticed, you go with you, and we're running forward together, right? So, but it's not like, oh yeah, you're great, because that externalizes. I want the experience to be internal. So it's very quiet. It can be totally nonverbal. We train parents to not say good, yes, to just feel it inside, because one of the parents would bring her, and every little change got them to feel hopeful and grateful and happy. They saw that it's going the right way or possibility. The other parent actually had the reverse reaction, basically, because the changes were so small, quote unquote, that they got despaired. And I started noticing, and then I noticed it also other places. So I realized it's not just me fantasizing. I realized that when she was with one parent, everything, she changed really fast. I mean, the progress was just tuck, 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 tuck. The other parent, it was like wet clay. And after a while, I asked the one parent that felt good about the process, the little changes, to be the only one to bring her. 2 years. Until the changes were so significant that it didn't matter which parent came. I mean, she's arrived at such a place that it was fine, either parent.
Yeah.
And I've had it with other people. I've had it sometimes with therapists, you know, that come to watch. And if they were like, you know, had difficult feelings or competitive feelings, I felt it immediately in the child.
Yeah.
You know, so that's
if I remember correctly, with the enthusiasm essential and that particular chapter, the parent who was getting better results with the child was saying, look how far you've come, and then the mother was saying, oh man, they've got so far to go, or something like that.
No, it's actually a lot more immediate. It's in the moment. So we're now working with a wonderful gal, adult, fully, you know, on the older side, who had a devastating stroke, went through 3 years of intense, you know, rehab, and then found us and moved here to be able to work. And I don't know how she was before the stroke, but she changes, and she really is still very impacted, but by what is not there yet. I mean, she remembers how she was before.
Mm-hmm.
And she keeps comparing herself to how she was before. So when she's with us, she feels the change and she's delighted. But then when she doesn't get our emotional support, she sinks into the sense of the comparison. And she's paying a high price for it. I mean, she is progressed and she's doing a lot better. And also during therapy, they told her, whoever was her therapist kind of scared her about a few things. If you don't hold the arm, your shoulder will disconnect. If you don't do this, this will happen. And it's kind of like it's already not happening, and already the arm is free, and already the arm is hanging, and it hasn't fallen off the shoulder. It's like, but there's a huge bias towards the fear. Actually, for her, the trigger is the fear, and that is so enthusiasm. I wrote the book for the parents and the therapists, but in this case, my listener is the adults who are themselves the subjects. So it is really a practice, not to go into denial, not to say that everything is fine when it's not. Denial is not my thing. However, the change is really the change. And because it's a quantum system, the brain, it's not a small change or a large change. It is a change or no change. It is a desired change or an undesired change. These are the distinctions. So if it's in the direction you want, if you feel, so, you know, when I work with somebody and they get off the table and they are free of pain, and then they say, well, let me see if I feel the pain. I said, no, if you look for it, you'll find it. And especially if you have had this for a long time, 3 years of you know, all the limitations and everything, they're there. She can always go back to it. That's not something that I mean, it's just like you can go back to crawling on all fours.
You can change your physiology so that it's making
we don't
pain again.
Lose the old patterns. We develop new ones.
Yeah. And you replace the old pattern with a new one.
Yeah, I will need to get off really soon.
That's okay.
I mean, I'm always happy to talk with you and your audience again. Listen, I would like, we are going to be showing A Life Unbound. And it's a very, very inspiring. We have Merzenich on it. We have Norman Deutsch on it. Is Norman Deutsch? No, Norman Deutsch is not on it. We have Merzenich. Norman Deutsch has the introductory to the book. We have Martha Herbert. We have Jill Bolte Taylor. We have 5 scientists that say why they think what I do is a cool. I mean, the approach makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. The approach makes sense. Look, I really appreciate.
And then I'd love you to let your people know so they can watch it.
Yeah, absolutely. I will. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate the fact that you do the work that you do. Your book is amazing. I haven't finished it yet. I'm going to finish it. And it really has changed the way that I can now kind of express the path to recovery, where before it didn't feel like I was doing that I had the best opportunity in the version of recovery that I was given, although I'm very grateful for it. I see how it can be definitely enhanced by adding some of the amazing essentials that you spoke about, and that we've already discussed. So it does do that. Like, your method does make me feel, and I think I would have benefited from having those additional essentials and that different counterintuitive way to look at recovery all those years ago. But that being said, it doesn't mean it. I love what you also said earlier, which was that the recovery version that I was given is still amazing in the face of having no recovery support. So it's brilliant, right? And I'm very happy and grateful for it. This is a great tool to enhance the things that other people are doing.
And I would go further. It's not just enhance what they do. It's different what we do. It's to transform how we do it. We did move from buggies to airplanes. So there's still transportation. It will still be recovery.
Yeah.
But it's a different universe.
Yeah.
It's as Feldenkrais said, it's an important step in the evolution of humankind.
Beautiful.
It's different humans that operate that way, use their own brains. You see, you can't help somebody else to go gentler and do variations. And if you're stuck and rigid and repetitive and limited and too forceful, you have to be doing the essentials from within yourself. So your awareness one of my essentials is awareness.
Yeah.
I mean, it's truly it's evolution of the use of self as what was given to us. Look at us. That we have a ways to go. But so it's not just improving what they're doing. It's different.
Yeah, and I love that part. I love that part that you said. It's also about us understanding the 9 essentials, the people recovering, so that we can apply them.
Being the 9 essentials, with us exercising.
Yeah.
You can't do them. You can't bring them to someone else if you're not doing them, because then you're not doing them. You're doing the opposite or different. Yeah. It's a transformational. It's a shift. It's not a little added thing. That was one of the things that people have asked me occasionally. Well, why don't you just, collaborate with the PTs? And so I said, because it's just like asking me to speak, Chinese when I'm speaking Hebrew. It's a different language. It's a different thing. And it's hopefully the future and not too far away from now. That's the point.
Annat, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for allowing me to speak what I really think. And thanks for all you're doing and for caring about your people.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode. This is an interview that you must listen to more than once, I believe. It is a very deep conversation that I must admit, even I struggled to have the words to bring out what I wanted Annat to discuss and tell us about, so that you can understand the importance of the work that she's doing and how she helps people. But if you do listen to it and you're curious and you just kind of barely understood some of the concepts, what I would encourage you to do is get her book. Absolutely get her book. Go through the book, listen to it online if you can't read it, and understand her 9 essentials to supporting somebody make gains in recovery after a traumatic brain injury, or whether they're born with a neurological condition, because they are really counterintuitive and quite amazingly expressed in the book, these 9 steps. Basically, so you know, before I wrap this episode up, what they are is essential number 1 is to move with attention. And it doesn't actually mean what the chapter heading says. It is far deeper and more nuanced than that. Essential number 2 is to do things slowly, to move slowly, and we briefly touched on that in the episode. Essential 3 is variation, to give the body lots of different variation, lots of different ways to get to the same outcome or to the same intention. Essential number 4 is to use subtlety, something we didn't really go into too much and discuss. Essential number 8 is to, I beg your pardon, essential number 5 is to enroll enthusiasm in the path to celebration of wins that somebody has, no matter how big or small they are. Essential 6 is flexible goals, which is a really important one, which we didn't touch on, that you need to understand about having flexible goals so that the goal posts can be moved in your favor if you don't reach a particular outcome. Essential 7 is the learning switch, which I haven't read about yet, and I'm not sure what that refers to, but that no doubt it's going to be another amazing chapter. Essential 8 is imagination and dreams. So how to activate your imagination, and I'm not sure exactly what dreams refers to, but it'd be really worth looking at. And essential 9 is awareness, and I imagine that's around about having awareness about what it is that you're experiencing and that you're noticing. And although the book's written for parents, it kind of is something that you could look at and learn from and apply to yourself in your own recovery. And potentially you could make this book available to your caregivers so that they know what page you're on, if they're interested in understanding a different way of looking at recovery, and not only your caregivers, but also your physical therapists and your occupational therapists. I know I'm going on about this book and it seems like I have shares in it. I don't. This is not a book that's like all the other books. It's a very, very different book, and that's perspective is very different. So anyhow, if at all you got curious about it, you'll be able to find the links to the book and to Anat's website via the show notes. So please feel free to go to recoveryafterstroke.com/episodes so that you can see her episode, and then click on the link there and it'll open up and it'll give you all the details on the show notes. So thank you so much for coming to the podcast and listening every week. I really appreciate it. Thanks for all the people who have left a review. Thanks to the people who get in touch and leave me amazing feedback and let me know how much the podcast does for them. And I really appreciate the people who are sharing this podcast on social media and telling other people about it, because it's really making it easier for other stroke survivors who are going through something similar to what we've all been through. It's making it easier for them to find the podcast, and that makes a huge difference when you're in that early phase. And if you remember how good it was when you discovered the podcast, it makes a huge difference to to how people can go about their recovery and not feel alone, and hopefully it'll lift their spirits and it'll teach them something. If you're a stroke survivor with a story to share about your experience, come join me on the show. The interviews are not scripted. You do not have to plan for them. All you have to do to qualify is be a stroke survivor or care for a stroke survivor, or be somebody who helps out stroke survivors, whether you're in the medical field or in an allied health environment. Just go to recoveryafterstroke.com/contact, fill out the contact form, and as soon as I receive it, I will respond with more details on how you can choose a time that works for you and me to meet over Zoom. Thanks again for being here and listening. I truly appreciate you, and see you on the next episode.
Importantly, we present many podcasts designed to give you an insight and understanding into the experiences of other individuals. Opinions and treatment protocols discussed during any podcast are the individual's own experience, and we do not necessarily share the same opinion, nor do we recommend any treatment protocol discussed. All content on this website and any linked blog, podcast, or video material controlled this website or content is created and produced for informational purposes only and is largely based on the personal experience of Bill Gasiamis. The content is intended to complement your medical treatment and support healing. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice and should not be relied on as health advice. The information is general and may not be suitable for your personal injuries, circumstances, or health objectives. Do not use our content as a standalone resource to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease for therapeutic purposes or as a substitute for the advice of a health professional. Never delay seeking advice or disregard the advice of a medical professional, your doctor, or your rehabilitation program based on our content. If you have any questions or concerns about your health or medical condition, please seek guidance from a doctor or other medical professional. If you are experiencing a health emergency or think you might be, call 000 if in Australia, or your local emergency number immediately for emergency assistance, or go to the nearest hospital emergency department. Medical information changes constantly. While we aim to provide current, quality information in our content, we do not provide any guarantees and assume no legal liability or responsibility for the accuracy, currency, or completeness of the content. If you choose to rely on any information within our content, you do so solely at your own risk. We are careful with links we provide. However, third-party links from our website are followed at your own risk, and we are not responsible for any information you find there.